let's call to order the March 13th, 2017 meeting of the Operations Work Group. The first item on the agenda is public appearances, and we have two. First is Leila Stefan, followed by Chris Caruzzi. So if you want to come in and take a chair, make sure the mic, one of the mics is turned on, or just
I
press.
think they're on.
It's
Okay.
not a microphone, it's a record. So it should be lit.
Light is green. Okay.
And you get 3 minutes, and I'll start the timer, and then you can begin.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So my name is Lita Stefan, and I am a parent of a first grader and a third grader at Glen Stevens Elementary. And we've seen our class sizes in the first grade in particular this year rise to 24 to 25 students in our first grade class. So Glen Stevens, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a wonderful school with a lot of diversity. And I think our administration and our staff do a really good job of kind of teaching kids to enjoy and appreciate that diversity. But we do have a lot of students that need extra support. So there are English language learners who often need extra support both in the bilingual classroom and in the regular English speaking classrooms. And so we have 43% English language learners, which is among the highest in the district. We also have 43% low-income students on free and reduced lunch. And so this is, again, moderate to high in the district. But unlike a lot of other schools with our statistics, we don't get SAGE AGR funding. So right now, fairly equivalent schools are seeing class sizes of 18, and we're seeing class sizes of 24 to 25. So this has caused a lot of disruption in the classroom through behavior management and time management. And I've seen my third grader I saw with some of these same teachers. So I know that these are excellent teachers, and the kind of the limits of that classroom structure are really being pushed by having such large sizes. So we would like to ask for an additional allocation for next year, because right now, based on the predictions, which don't really accurately represent the number of students we have or the number of students with need, we are seeing predicted class sizes next year of 24 again for the same set of students at the beginning of the school year. And I hear that those could actually rise to about 27 students before we would trigger a new class. So we're asking specifically for an extra allocation for next year for the second graders at Glen Stevens. And we're also asking for more equitable staffing to take into account the dynamics and the demographics of our students at Glen Stevens, since we do not have the designation of SAGE AGR, but we do have that kind of a student body and that kind of a need. So we have a petition because we were trying to find a way to kind of poll our parents and see what the parent agreement was on this. So I'll leave that petition with a number of signatures and other comments on it for you to consider as well.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, our second and final speaker tonight is Chris Caruzzi.
Hi, I'm Chris Caruzzi. I'm a parent at Jefferson and Memorial. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to just touch on all three items on tonight's agenda, the first being the budget. First, I'm encouraged to see the district looking at staff compensation and a $15 living minimum wage. Good things to talk about. However, under option number 2, a substantial portion of the savings that would be reaped from going to one HMO is going into higher starting salaries for new staff and also front-loading the pay scale for teachers. And I'm concerned that this is not accompanied by a clear across-the-board pay increase in the plan. We need to attract really good new teachers, but we also need to do everything we can to retain the amazing teachers we have in our district. We have some of the best teachers in the state. I'm concerned that if we're starting people with higher salaries and we're front-loading the pay scale, the teachers who've been here for 10, 20 or more years are going to feel disenfranchised, want to retire sooner, want to look for other opportunities. On the ethics policy, specifically policy 1540, items 8 and 15 include new language about use of social media. I'm concerned that this language is vague enough that the policy could be interpreted in a way that could step on board members' First Amendment rights. As elected officials, I do believe that school board members have the right to criticize the administration, and they have the right to criticize majority opinions taken by the board if they're not in agreement with those opinions, as long as they aren't disclosing confidential or privileged information. And finally, I wanted to comment briefly on the magnet policy. the policy says that proposals for magnet schools can come from the board or can come from the superintendent, but the policy only describes the process for superintendent-initiated magnet schools. And I think it needs to include a similar process for board-initiated magnet schools. As a parent, the message that comes out of that policy is that magnet schools are places of innovation, and that innovation is a top-down process that comes from the superintendent's office. And I really believe at the end of the day that innovation needs to be something that is coming out of every one of our schools, and that every one of our schools has the freedom and flexibility to innovate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. All right. Next up, we have approval of the minutes. And I move that we approve the minutes of the Operation Work Group meetings dated January 23rd and February 13th, 2017.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? That passes. Anna, did I hear an aye from you? It's not. That passes 6-0. Next up is our first substantive issue, 2017-18 Budget Development, Benefits and Compensation. So, Superintendent.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I'd like to invite Mike, Deirdre, and Rochelle. It's all right, Rochelle. It's going to be fine. This is Rochelle's first time, I think, with the board, so I know we're all going to support her in this experience.
Introduce Rochelle.
Yeah. Rochelle, do you want to say a little bit about yourself so that since this is the board's first time meeting you?
I'm Rochelle Haiti. I am somewhat new to the district. I've been here about 8 months and really manage the employee benefits side of the world along with retiree benefits. Prior to being at the school district, I worked in the private sector at 2 large global companies, Baker Tilly and Spectrum Brands. So this is an exciting opportunity here.
We're thrilled to have you, and I'm sure you'll see her shine tonight. I wanted to say a few things before I pass it over to our team. As you know, we've been working on budget for quite some time now. Tonight, we are going to be focusing on employee compensation, which of course includes benefits. It's part of that umbrella topic. As we have articulated in our goals and priorities for budget, we all understand the budget is a statement of our priorities, and we want to make sure that we're using it to do the work that is central to our efforts for raising student achievement and narrowing achievement gaps. That, in our opinion, requires that we have a thriving workforce, that investing in our employees and investing directly in services to students are in no way, shape, or form for us in conflict with one another. Those ideas go hand in hand. It is why tonight's discussion is so important. As you know, last month the governor released a proposal on state budget which requires a 12% employee premium contribution in order to get new state funding. We have said already, and I'll reiterate tonight, that we think that that proposal is unnecessary and removes local control from our school board. We want everyone to know that we'll continue to make sure that our voice is heard on that proposal. But we also need to plan and consider our options in case that proposal does indeed become law. We are very proud of the work that we've actually done over the last 2 years on employee insurance benefits in particular. We've worked hard to collaborate with our employees to make sure that we're making the best possible decisions. We want to continue that way of working, and I think you'll see that tonight. We're going to be presenting some options to the board, and there are a couple of things that I want you to know about what we're presenting up front. The first is that we have no intention of taking any funding out of total compensation because we don't think that you need to. We don't think it's necessary in order for us to achieve our goal. So you're going to see that overall compensation actually hasn't changed. It's just more the mix of how compensation, how that works will change potentially. The options that we present, just to demonstrate that point a little bit more, use our savings to fund steps, lanes, base wage, and additional compensation. The second, just kind of big idea that we want to present to you up front is that we've used this as an opportunity to just push ourselves harder on how to use compensation to attract, retain, and support our employees in doing their best work. So not only do we want to protect overall compensation, but we actually want to use this as an opportunity to push our thinking, and we hope you'll see that tonight. If our employees are thriving, our students will be thriving. We think those things go hand in hand. Last thing I'll say is the presentation we have for you tonight is pretty short and sweet, a little shorter than usual from Mr. Barry, but it's very conceptual. So you may feel that like you're not getting the level of detail that you want yet, and that is purposeful. We want to kind of put some big conceptual ideas out there, get your direction, and based on that direction, we're going to flesh out those ideas in great detail in time for the April meeting. So just want to make sure you know that was intentional. We're going to, I think, try to just plow through this and open it up for question and answer and discussion at the end. If you do have a clarifying question along the way, feel free to ask it. But we're going to have a kind of big pause at the end of the presentation. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mike.
Okay, so I'll get this presentation started. This is the March Operations Work Group, and we're going to focus on, for March, employee compensation. We're also going to focus on the governor's 12% employee premium contribution and what that means for health insurance in general and what that means for wages and salaries. So that's what we're about to do tonight. So Deirdre is going to be doing the majority of this presentation. I'm sure you're delighted that I won't be. It's for a change of pace. In April, I want to point out that we have a lot of work yet to do before we present the actual budget proposal. We still have to assemble all these individual parts of the budget that you've been weighing in on, as you can see when you look backwards at the calendar, staffing and priority actions and so on. We have to assemble all that into a coherent whole. We have to address whatever open issues are still out there in April, and there will be several. I'm not too alarmed about that in March, but we have a ways to go. Our revenue strategy, we have two revenue strategies. We had one, but then the governor put in this contingent $200 per pupil strategy. So we have two revenue scenarios to deal with. And then ultimately in April, we start with the amendment process, the public input process, board questions, and so on. So we have a ways to go, but we get started in March with compensation. By the way, every month we present what feedback we have received from various sources within the district, and we just keep track and report this out to the board. The website tracker had 15 comments during a fairly narrow window. This is mid-February to March 7th, and they're both themes here are around employee compensation, which is timely because that's what we'll be addressing this evening. And then you can see from the teacher and parent advisories a broader range of topics. And I'm pleased that as we are developing the scope of our proposal for next month, that all of these items in one form or another are or will be addressed in the budget document. So it's nice to see that there's sort of a consistent agenda kind of throughout the organization for next year. Okay, so this is our budget development cycle, and as you know, we dealt with goals and guiding principles way back at the outset, and that was November. The revenue forecast, as I've mentioned, we have two now. The forecast where there's $200 per pupil, if that were to survive The legislative process would obviously be favorable and would give us a lot more flexibility in preparing next year's budget. We'll have to keep monitoring it, and we'll present the April budget, perhaps with sort of both scenarios in mind. Maybe we'll know more by the end of April. The priority actions were the focus of December and January's work led by Lisa, and that has pretty much settled into place at about $4 million worth of priority actions. I'm going to skip over the next two boxes and go down to the bottom two. Required allowances is a smaller exercise and just projecting forward the contractual obligations we have for next year around transportation, utilities, things like that. That work is done. You'll see it in the April budget. And the last is staffing plan, which obviously was the focus of last month's work. We were delighted in putting together a staffing plan for next year that didn't rely or need position reductions for the first time in a few years. That was the big win coming out of the local community referendum to exceed the revenue limits. So that takes us back then to salary and wage planning and employee benefit plans. And so kind of the core message on this is that, as in past years, we have funded step advancement on the existing salary schedule, which is about a $4.5 million item. Lane movement, where people move for advanced degrees, that's about a $400,000 placeholder, and at least a portion of base wage. This year, base wage was a $240,000 item. Next year, we have a reserve for about $625,000, and the idea was that was one of the last things that would come together. We would improve upon it if we could, depending on how everything turns out in April. And then we had health insurance and the benefits in general. And again, as per usual, our plan was to try to hold health insurance at or near a zero increase, at or near, based on a 3 HMO model. Then we had this 12% employee premium contribution issue. And then also we had an alternative benefit strategy, which you'll see tonight, around 1 HMO. So a lot of activity in this part of the budget. And with all that, fancy graphics, we'll move on.
Yeah, so just to remind the board, throughout our budget process, we've always been using our Thriving Workforce Priority as a foundation and a focus for the work that we're doing, specifically when we're making decisions about health insurance and compensation. Through our compensation work last year and the discussions that we've had this year, we know that this is a key area of improvement for us. And we also know how important it is and what a personal decision this is for staff. And so we want to be sure that you know that we've been engaging our employee representative groups throughout this process and discussion. So before we dive into the options that we want to share, we just want to remind the board of the current health insurance enrollment by HMO and share a little bit of the history of how we've gotten here. Excuse me. So as you can see, GHC is the biggest share of employees. 52% of those folks that are enrolled in healthcare are choosing GHC as their plan, followed by Unity and then Dean. You can also see on our chart here the breakdown by who's choosing single plans versus family and the corresponding cost, and then the total cost of premium for each one of those plans. Again, GHC has the lowest cost plan and Unity has the highest. And so some of the things that are important to note is that all of these plans are really good plans. I mean, it's good coverage across all plans. Essentially, they're the same, meaning that staff get the same coverage from each plan. But the one thing to really note is that there's a difference cost between our lowest provider, which is GHC, and our highest being Unity. Mike, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about history and where we've been as it relates to this enrollment?
Well, how about just near-term history, last couple of years maybe? Health insurance has been more prominent in our budget discussions the last few years, and there's reasons for that. Revenues have been very tight, enrollments have been flattening out. The ability to use fund balance became more and more limited. The availability of unused levy authority became more and more limited. And so when you looked at when one looked at the overall budget, and we had a goal around funding steps and lanes and base wage, and trying to limit the number of reductions in staff, and trying to fund priority actions. Health insurance was part of that mix, and our goal again was to try to hold health insurance at or near zero as part of that overall mix of priorities. And so 3 years ago there was a 5% increase in health insurance, then 2 years ago a 0 increase, and then this year what was effectively a 2.7% increase in the premiums. And then the employee premium contribution table that you see on the bottom right effectively brought that cost down to 0. So that has been our recent results. That came out of a process of more engagement earlier, face-to-face with the HMOs, involving the union representatives, employee representatives at the table, in those sort of meet and confer meetings with the HMOs. And then looking at small plan designs or other moves like this employee premium contribution table to accomplish those goals. And with that came the other wins that you saw in the budget as part of an overall budget strategy. We did not, in any of the past 3 years, really look at the underlying fundamentals of a health plan, which is what we're going to look at tonight.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about our overall health insurance plan, there are really two key issues that we want to focus in on tonight. And one is the 12% employee premium contribution that the governor is proposing, and a one HMO plan. So when we're talking about if the governor's budget proposal goes through, and there is a requirement for all staff to have a 12% employee premium contribution, that will be a significant increase for many of our staff. So we have an average of about a 3.5% premium contribution right now. So for those folks, that will be a significant increase. However, the increase in the premium would bring in about $4.5 million, and we have a plan to capture and reallocate those dollars to wages and salaries. So that's the first issue. Second is the option to change to a one HMO plan. So currently we have a three HMO model that provides some choice, which we know that our employees appreciate. The choice of the 3 HMO model is approximately $5.5 million per year to the overall cost of the entire plan. So based on input that we've had from the HMOs, a one HMO model may be inevitable with this 12% employee premium contribution incenting migration over time. So we'd like to propose a plan to transition potentially or possibly to that one HMO model and capture and reallocate that additional $5.5 million into compensation for employees. So we'll walk you through the first option, which is again, continuing with the 3 HMO model with the required 12% employee premium contribution. What we would be proposing is that we would continue to fund steps, lanes, as we have in the past, and fund a base wage at a slightly higher percentage than we did last year. Step 2 would be to capture and reallocate those dollars that would be coming from the 12% employee premium increase and reallocate those dollars back to wage and salary schedules in the form of additional pay. And we feel like we would do this because we value our employees. We certainly want to retain them. We understand the burden that this would put on some staff, and this essentially wasn't a part of our original plan for insurance options this year. So that's option 1.
Okay.
As we transition into option 2, this is looking at the one HMO model with the required 12% employee premium contribution. So steps 1 and 2 are essentially the same as they were in our option 1, which would be funding steps, lanes, some base wage, and capturing those dollars from the 12% employee premium contribution. Step 3 would take it a step further by capturing and reallocating an additional $5.5 million from the one HMO premium reduction and reallocating those dollars to priorities that surfaced during our 2015 compensation study work. And we feel like this option that we're putting forward is important. We value our employees, and we want to propose addressing some of our compensation challenges through some of these targeted actions. So we'll get into the detail of the targeted actions. We'll just start from the top and just work our way down. Because it's important to us and we want to attract a diverse, highly qualified staff, we're proposing moving the beginning teacher salary schedule, beginning teacher salary rate from $37,000 to $41,000 at a total cost of about $460,000. Because we know that summer school is a critical intervention for students, many of whom are students of color, we want to increase the likelihood that they will have access to highly qualified staff, our highly qualified staff. So we're proposing that we increase the teacher pay for summer school to a much more competitive rate, so moving from $16 an hour to $30 an hour for our summer school staff. Because we know that some of our support staff who have a significant impact on the success of our students aren't making at least $15 an hour, we want to bring those 385 employees up to that $15 an hour wage and continue to bring folks that are in those support positions in at that rate. We've also surveyed staff who have told us that they'd like to see programming that helps them deal with stress, work on mindfulness, and overall health and well-being. And because of that, we're looking at investing in program to support those requests and move to an incentive-based participation model rather than a punishment-based, or we prefer the carrot, not the stick. Let's just put it that way. And then because we realize that moving from a 3 HMO model reduces insurance premiums, but it does require a change for 48% of our staff that are holding insurance, we also want those staff to benefit through a salary and wage increase. So really looking at a universal opportunity for us to support staff across the board. And then finally, because we want to demonstrate our commitment to all staff, we do want to have some dollars to consider changes to salary schedules and use an opportunity for our compensation committee to look specifically at adjusting salary schedules for a more front-loaded pay so that employees can earn more faster. We've had ideas around designing coherent professional development tracks to incent specific skill development for our staff. We've also looked at and want to continue to explore development of clearer career paths and relate that to compensation, and then also explore compensation strategies for high needs areas at a cost of about $1.2 million for that bucket specifically. So those are the targeted actions that we are proposing with this health insurance option number 2. I'm going to have Mike just walk us through the numbers
Sure.
from a budget standpoint.
Same concepts, just expressed in terms of budget dollars. And this also shows the progression of the budget development over the last few months. So we're highlighting here the sort of wage and salary and benefit portion of the budget. And the first column called early draft, this was December, pre-Governor Walker budget proposal. And you can see that in the budget, the components were steps and lanes and then base wage. Simple. And then option 1, this was our attempt to capture in budget dollars the concepts that Deirdre just went through. Steps and lanes are still there in the top line. And then you can see in bold a negative $4.5 million in benefits. That reflects a decrease in the employer's cost of health insurance because the employer would be paying a smaller share of the health insurance. The downside of that is that the employees are paying a larger share of the health insurance. And so the corresponding offset to that is when you look at the second line under salaries, wages, it says based on 12% employee premium contribution, you can see that wage line going from $625,000 up to $5,125,000. You're essentially adding the $4.5 million there, right? So that means that that the 12% employee premium contribution, if it were to become real, would be handled in this way. The savings would be captured and reallocated within overall compensation, as Deirdre explained. And then the second option, the 1 HMO and 12% employee premium contribution, these are related. Deirdre made a comment about inevitability earlier in the presentation, and what's behind that is that we have a balanced 3 HMO and a neutral plan design right now, where an employee is free to choose whichever plan they prefer, and there's almost no financial difference to the employee in terms of which plan they choose. It's very small. It just depends on your employee premium contribution and which plan you're in. It's really not enough to make, it's not a driver of decision making. Really, it's not enough to do that. But if we have a 12% employee premium contribution, the difference between an employee paying 12% of the high cost plan versus the low cost plan begins to become significant. More than $600 per employee per year. And that will eventually begin to impact employee choice and behavior. It will create an incentive for people to migrate to the low-cost plan. It becomes disruptive to the overall plan. The unities and deans will look at this and say, this plan design is not working for us. It's only going to go downhill. And that's the concept behind inevitability. That's coming from the HMO side, not from us. So there are market forces at work here. This option 2 is intended to capture that. It shows the same as option 1, the employee premium contribution going into effect but being returned entirely to employees. And then there's a second piece, $5.5 million worth of healthcare costs being moved out of health benefit line and into wage salary. And that $5.5 million is allocated the way that Deirdre just described. So this is not about cutting health insurance. It's about reallocating, and I think ultimately the test is the reallocation net positive for the organization. And that is to be determined, frankly, at this point. Right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So we wanted to pause there and invite board comment and find out what you think thus far, what we can do to help you process these issues, and see if we can answer your questions.
Anyone have any questions? Dean?
Yeah, I'll start. Globally, as an elected official and a citizen, I'd prefer to have a national health care plan that would solve all this stuff. But we don't have that right now. So I'm still an elected official. It doesn't mean I can't try to impact it from where I sit. So what I'm seeing here is a plan that essentially holds harmless. If we do any of these, is that no one pays more than what they're paying right now, in a sense. And there's creative ways of getting around that. So I have several. With that, I also understand. Can you like to hear a little bit more about the conversations that you're having with the MTI around this proposal, and if they're at it, and my friend in the red shirt's back there, so we want to make sure that they're hearing this and that they're at the table when we discuss this, so that it doesn't, so we can get some buy-in up front. Then there are, so I'd like to tell me a little bit more about that, and then I want to hear some specific questions that, even though we're plugging savings back in the salaries, are the payments, are they post or pre-tax? Because if they're post, then it's not an equal, there's not a savings there. There'll still be a hit. Their take-home pay will go down. And I think that's what we're trying to get at here, is that that doesn't happen, and that there's actually a raise involved, even though they have to pay more for health care or for a benefit. So that's kind of the two things I want to know is the staff through MTI, where are they at with you in developing what you told us? If it's if the staff pays pre or post tax, and if it's post, I want to know what the plan there is to make sure that people's take-home pay don't go down, no matter what we do here. And so those are the two main things that I want to hear right now.
Yeah, so I can address the employee representative groups and the engagement up
You know,
to this
A
point.
little hearing problem for me today.
I'm sorry.
All you'd speak a little louder.
Sure. So we have engaged MTI and our other employee representative groups through this process, like we have in the past, and we did last year. So they have been a part of the discussions. They have met with us as we've met with insurance carriers. We met with them as late as last week to talk specifically about what was being presented here today. And so we've had engagement with them all along the way. And I think one other thing to note is that certainly they are part of our employee compensation work group. So when we look at all of the targeted actions, they've had an opportunity to provide input on those, give us their feedback, and as we move forward, they'll certainly be a part of that process as we continue discussions on whether or not, we have approval to go forward with the additional dollars as part of the compensation committee, but they're part of that process and would be fully engaged in that as well.
And the post or pre-tax.
Who wants to take post and pre-tax?
I'll give it a try, and then, I think the root of this is the employee premium contribution at 12% as opposed to 3.5% average, which now, where it is now. That employee premium contribution is taken pre-tax, which is to the advantage of the employee, obviously. When those dollars are moved over into salary, they would be taxed as any other salary would. So net FICA comes out the same. There's a FICA savings and a FICA cost to the employee and to the employer. So moving this money from the benefit side to the salary side on FICA, it's neutral. Then on WRS, however, Wisconsin Retirement System, it would be an increase in WRS contributions for both the employer and the employee at the rate of 6.8%. I don't know any way to get around that because it's WRS eligible wages. So now then I guess that leaves a third piece of, well, how exactly are we proposing to distribute those dollars, the 4.5 million or the 5.5 million? Well, you saw the 5.5 million. But the 4.5, all we've said at this point is move to wage and salary. It doesn't say on a percentage basis, whole dollar basis, highly compensated employees versus less compensated employees. We do have more work to do with employee representatives on what that strategy would look like. At this point, we've simply committed to dollar for dollar movement, with distribution to be determined.
And what are the options in that part, as far as the distribution?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. I'll just give you the most common ones, which would be increase the existing salary schedules on a percentage basis until you have increased wages by $4.5 million. Increase salary schedules on a whole dollar basis until you have used up the $4.5 million. Increase the salary schedules in more targeted ways based on low income, medium income, high income positions. There are endless variety of these types of distribution options.
I
And
guess I land on the side of
yeah.
equitable distribution as opposed to equal, to compensate for the
Mhm.
different percentage of what people pay in now, that a 12% hit from someone at 1.25% as opposed to someone who's 5%, that's a different hit. And they shouldn't get equal. They
Right.
should be both given what gets them up to 12%. So the 3% should get a 9, the 5 should get a 7, and
Mhm.
that type of stuff.
Mhm.
That's what I'm kind of thinking that's more fair.
Okay, I hear you.
Mary, are you just thinking? Oh, I'm sorry, James, anything? Okay, well, I've got some questions. Mike, you're assuming that the one HMO would be GHC. Is that a given, or could the others bid for the business?
We put out an RFP 2-3 months ago, 4 months ago.
Probably in November.
Yeah, quite. As expected, they reflect the kind of current pricing structure, with GHC being significantly less expensive than the other HMOs. And so right now, our working assumption, I'm going to say it that way, is that GHC would be the most likely of the 3 HMOs to be the single HMO if we went to that model. And then that's reinforced by the fact that GHC already covers more than half, slightly more than half of the existing employee groups. Excuse me, more than half of the existing employees.
And the cost savings that you were assuming, is that simply based on if the current GHC rates were applied to everyone? Or is there something more involved in the calculation?
It is more involved. If you were to just run the math on that, you could, on the slide that has the current state,
Right.
you would see that if you moved everybody to the low-cost plan, either in single or in family, the potential swing in total premiums is closer to 7 million, not 5.5. However, GHC is factoring in the idea that plans that would be migrating from Dean or Unity are more likely, and they have this information, to have higher claims experience, such that GHC doesn't see that there'd be a complete net gain of 7 million. And so there's a bit of a reduction there to 5.5 million. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Higher cost claims, higher medical loss
Right.
ratios in the other two plans.
And what options would be available for employees who are currently on Unity or Dean and for some reason just need to stay with them?
When we priced this out, we looked at the majority of employees moving to that HMO plan. But we're all aware that it's people who maybe live farther away than access to a GHC clinic or still would prefer to see their doctors at Dean or Unity or somewhere else. So we have brought into the plan a point of service plan where employees can either select the HMO or the point of service plan, and if they elect the point of service plan, they would pay more in premiums because the premiums are higher. They could incur some out-of-network costs because they would be going out of network, but they would still be given the choice and the ability to see those providers and have insurance coverage for those providers.
Do you have a rough estimate of how much it might cost for a person in that position? How much more than
The
the
premium,
12%?
if we look at the premium, just total cost of plan from family to family, family HMO to family point of service, it's about $700 more a month. But we can look at options and how the employee pays that difference. They may not have to incur that total cost. We could look at different pricing models for that. And then for going out of network, there could be a deductible or coinsurance built in. And we can work through, there's multiple plan designs to be able to come up with a solid meeting point where the premium meets the need.
Okay.
We've talked, if I may just add, the point of service option may be important to a subset of the employee group. And so that needs to be a real choice. So especially in the first year or even the second year. So what we've talked about is working on the pricing model such that at least in year one or year two, which you might call kind of a transition period, that point of service plan is priced in such a way that it ensures that it's within the grasp or within the financial reach of our employees, so that it is a real choice. But over time, there's no point in going to a one HMO model if you have a point of service option that is so easily accessible that that the price discipline of the one HMO model is compromised. Does that make sense? It should be available. It should be the exception rather than the rule, and ultimately it should be priced in such a way that that the financial logic of this holds up. Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Speaking from my own experience, just a few years ago, we got booted off of Physicians Plus and had to go to Group Health, and they were actually quite good in the transition. They covered stuff that had been previously scheduled with other doctors in a way that was better than I expected. So that was, for what that's worth, that's an anecdote, but they were good on that. With respect to how you would allocate the extra money, one of the points was to raise the starting salary from $37,000 to $41,000. Would that result in some compression on the pay scale? Would you need to bump up the next levels, or could you just, how would that work?
So the way that we're looking at it right now is essentially what we would call lapping off of
Would just drop the lower?
Drop the lowers, and that becomes the new starting. There's a small subset of folks that are between those where we would lop off and where we would start, and so part of that, those dollars that we had in there is bringing those folks to that equal level. So there's no leapfrogging that would be happening with this proposal.
And then one of the things you were talking about was the possibility of an across-the-board increase with some of that money, but we can't do that, can we? We can't do that above the cost of living increase that the state imposes on us, can we?
Yes, we can, but it has to follow a certain protocol. There is a limit, a cap on the base wage that can be agreed upon in collective bargaining, which is the sole subject of collective bargaining, right? And that is You can find that on the WERC website at 1.26% for contracts or for handbook agreements effective July 1 of 2017. That's a given. So we couldn't exceed that cap on base wage. But there are other forms of compensation. There is supplementary pay. For example, we do steps and lanes. That's an example of pay that's not base wage. We've been doing that for the last few years. So there are other avenues of wage and salary that are available to the employer, to the board, to compensate employees that are additive or beyond base wage, but are just operate in a separate category.
I guess I don't know how that would be, that restriction in the law would be enforced. If you gave more than an across-the-board increase, what would happen? I mean, what's the consequence that you would potentially run?
Oh, I wouldn't even want to admit that possibility, so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't answer.
Imprison the board members, perhaps. Yeah, I don't know. Anyone else have any questions? Oh, I had another one. Well, let me just finish this. If you're going to follow the strategy, you have to get direction from us pretty quickly in terms of the one HMO versus three HMO strategy. How that money is then allocated among the employee groups would not be so pressing, I wouldn't think. But if you're going to pursue the one HMO thing, you'd pretty much have to get started soon. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. So, and the way that we put the plan together and the cost savings that could be reallocated into those targeted actions, that $5.5 million that we're talking about, was premised on a July 1 start date, July 1 of 2017. So it would require us to have some pre-approval from the board. There certainly are other options. I mean, we can take this out a little bit farther, a September 1 or a 1/1, but what that does is just, it eats into the amount of cost savings and what we would be able to do in those targeted actions, if that makes sense.
TJ?
First, I want to note that I did not participate in discussions around the health insurance because my family is covered by MMSD insurance. But there are some things in this presentation that I don't believe I need to recuse myself from, particularly the targeted actions on page 10. And I have some questions and comments about these. First off, I guess echo concerns heard earlier that if we are going to set a higher beginning teacher salary, I would like to see this done in the context of looking at the entire salary structures rather than simply lopping off. And my instinctive comfort level is that that this proposal devotes too much to starting salary and not enough to other steps in there. And so that, I mean, that's just a general comment, and if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I would just respond by saying that it was our intent on both looking at the beginning teacher salary schedule to do our work and really our commitment to attracting great staff. So that's first. And then we also were very specific in looking at those dollars for the compensation committee to use. And so the additional work around the overall salary schedule would be happening within that group.
I guess, again, I mean, my instinct is the division. I'd like to see how it all fits together before, having a final kind of comment on it. But I do think that, and I think that this takes a beginning teacher to what the current schedule is for a beginning BA teacher to what the current is for a beginning PhD teacher, or damn close to it. And those are hugely different investments, and I think that's. Again, I'd have to see the whole proposal, but that's a concern. Second question is that do we start teachers on emergency licenses at level 6 now? And would we be starting them at, is essentially level 8.5?
Yes.
And is that something that is in the contract, or is that something that is in the handbook?
I'll have to check on whether or not it's specific in the contract or not, and get back to you on that one.
Second thing is the summer school pay increase, almost doubling. And again, I'm not quite sure this is worth our 1.2 million, and I also have concerns that this puts summer school in the red. Last time we had a revenues generated by summer school enrollments figure was 2 years ago, and it came out to a little bit over 3 million, and our summer school budget's about 3 million. And so this puts us at about $4.3 million summer school budget, with revenues due to summer school enrollments in the 3 millions. And I think that we need to, take a closer look at how that plays out. Again, this is something where I think that an increase in summer school pay is appropriate and probably a good idea. I'm just not sure that going from 16 to 30 is justified. And so it's a comment if you want to. And Mike, maybe you can speak to revenues, because I haven't seen a revenue thing since, I think, 2015.
No, your recollection on the overall revenue and expenditure balance in summer school is right. It's about a little over 3 million of revenue and expenditure. We've looked at summer school wages for a few years. One of the things we want to avoid here is the intermediate move on wages that simply increases costs but doesn't achieve the policy ends that we want. So let's work backwards from the idea that we think summer school can and should be more effective as an intervention. We have said that. We know that. We think that at least a big part of that solution is our own best staff in our own schools with their students. And this is aimed right at getting our staff, and not just our new staff, but our full staff, interested and committed to teaching summer school. Critical Tier 3 intervention, we need to do it. And, we're just very concerned that a half measure is going to cost $500,000, and still we'll be recruiting teachers from McFarland. Nothing against the good people in McFarland, but we want our own staff.
Right. And the only other thing that I would add is, in looking at the pay for summer school teachers across all districts, TJ, it has increased over time, and we're looking at ranges of $22 to $25 to $30 an hour. So when we're looking at Sun Prairie and other districts.
Some kind of compilation of that
Yeah,
information,
absolutely.
that would be
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing is actually about insurance in some sense, but I was wondering if there's kind of an option to be in the works, which would be, say that the 12% requirement doesn't survive the budget process, but we still go to one HMO. And are we doing proposals around that scenario?
Yes.
That's a yes or no question. Good.
You might recall, the issue around the one HMO has been, if not dealt with directly, it's at least been it's been in the mix when we've talked about health insurance the last couple of years, because you don't have to be a health insurance expert to look at our plan and think, gee, the costs could go up $7 million if everybody went to the highest cost plan. They could go down by our calculation, $5.5 million if we went to the low-cost plan. And we work so hard on controlling health insurance costs, but every time 1% of our staff moves from GHC to Dean Unity, it's a $160,000 swing every time 1%. So we've always been concerned about how to capture or that cost, and we've always been curious to know whether if we were designing a health plan option from scratch today, would we have designed it this way? So what we were trying to do here was at least get an option out in front of the board and propose a reallocation of funds. Ultimately, you'll decide if it's worth it, right? But I wanted to emphasize that this one HMO as an option preceded the governor's 12% employee premium contribution. Where the two come together is the fact that a 12% employee premium contribution will very likely, if it becomes the law, create a strong incentive that will destabilize the HMO model. It adds to the urgency of the issue.
And one more kind of semi-related question is that if we are looking at, if we're taking bids on a single HMO contract, are we looking at different lengths of contract? And are we taking bids on multiple lengths? Are we asking for a 3-year or 1-year or 5-year? Are we saying give us bids on all 4? I know I talked to Rochelle about this a little bit after the last meeting, and I can't remember what was said.
The process is we reached out to the carriers and we said we're looking at going to a single carrier plan. Give us your best rate. And within that, we built in a 3-year rate cap. 5 years is something that we can look at as well. 3 is what they all priced it at.
Okay, that's good to know. So everybody priced it 3-year. Great, thank you.
Those price caps come with a cost. I mean, who's going to bear the risk? And they have a lot of appeal, right? A rate cap, it sounds great. But remember, you're paying more on the front end. And so you have to balance that out. Because they're going to protect themselves.
Predictability is an appeal, that this doesn't come to dominate budget discussions year in and year out. And I think that's also an appeal.
Yes, definitely.
Mike or Deirdre, at the $30 an hour rate, how much can a teacher make for teaching summer school? What does it work out to about?
Michelle's doing really fast math right now.
I did some fast math today that you might be familiar with. $30 is about the hourly rate we pay teachers during the year for starting salary. It's about, if you get 40 grand a year and you work 18 weeks at 37.5 weeks, it's about $30 an hour.
Yeah, but I was asking, if you decide to teach summer school, you can expect to make $8,000, $10,000.
818. Shoot. 9,000.
How much?
Oh.
$9,000 over the
Okay.
course of 6 weeks.
And I know you hope that would attract, our best teachers. Do you have anything more than hope to rely on? I mean, have you talked to people and said, boy, if it were $30, then I would do it, but...
Well, I mean, when we were working within the compensation committee group, I mean, that was one of the things that the teachers that were part of that group said. Like, if you want us to teach summer school, then, pay us a contract rate, right?
Right.
And we'll be there. We feel pretty good about that. We're pretty confident that we would get some of our own teachers, and that's the goal.
Okay, thanks.
A quickie.
Pardon?
Yeah, air conditioning would help, too.
Yeah, I've heard
Dean?
that same thing from friends of mine that teach. They want more for summer school. And also, do you know of any of our own teachers that are teaching in summer school in a different district because they're paying more?
Yes.
Some do? Yeah, I imagine. I don't know. Yes, it'd be here for 16 and there for 22.
Yeah.
I think what we'll do is further flesh out each of these proposals. I know this is high level, pretty conceptual, but I think providing, just a more precise rationale for each one and what data and assumptions we're making will be helpful.
Anyone else? Any questions?
Yes, Ed.
Yeah, Anna?
I'm here. Sorry about that. I just want to mention again, being on the phone, there's a significant delay, so I get better reception on my laptop, so I'm trying to watch it via my laptop, but then that puts me at about a 10 to 15 second delay. But I'll try and stay on top of it. I just wanted to reiterate my desire to get the answer around the question in regard to teachers who have emergency certifications and what would be their starting pay. I share TJ's concern. I would be very concerned with having people teaching that are underqualified without proper certification making the same amount of money as those that do have the proper certification. So I guess if we could just get it, when you get that information, I would be interested in hearing that as well.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for an intriguing discussion.
And I'll just wrap it up by saying at the April board meeting, you can expect to see a much more detailed proposal. Please let us know if you have additional questions. In the meantime, we do not take this lightly by any means. We are taking great care in putting together a proposal that benefits our employees and in turn our students. So just thank you for your time. And thank you, team.
Okay. Next up is our discussion of proposed changes to board policies 9000A, 9000B, 1540, and 1540, which is the School Board Code of Conduct and Ethics. All right.
Hi. So we have a couple different policies to discuss tonight. We'll start with the three board member ethics policies that have been conflated into two policies. I provided kind of the standard summary chart that we give and then red line versions. You'll note in policy 1540, which is called School Board Ethics, that a number of points from policy 9000B, which was essentially the School Board Code of Conduct, have just been carried over to 1540. The purpose of this was to at least reduce the number of policies that we're looking at for board member ethics. And so we proposed voiding out 9000B and creating 1540, which applies only to the school board, and then 9000, which applies to all school district employees and members of the board. In 1540, I think there are two areas really worth highlighting. The first is that, as one of the public speakers noted, there is an express reference to the use of social media, and that actually occurs in two different places. In newly numbered sub 8, which is just a reminder of when even using an individual social media platform to be mindful that that can be construed as communicating on behalf of the board. So it's just that clarification that you can only act on behalf of the board when you're acting on behalf of the quorum. And then in 15, which is not any prohibition against the use of social media, but rather just a reminder to use it in an appropriate and legal manner. It is just one more platform by which we can inadvertently violate open meetings laws or make unintended disclosures of what is otherwise confidential information disclosed in a closed session, or engage in discussions as an employer that we usually don't engage in of employee or personnel conduct and or performance. So it is not a prohibition against the use of any tool, but just a reminder of the pitfalls that may arise as we speak with any platform. The other main addition in 1540 is a more defined procedure and or protocol for addressing conflicts of interest when conflicts of interest arise, with regard to like physically disavowing the topic of conversation, either when in closed session or in a work group or in a regular board meeting. Other than that, I tried to highlight where we were pulling language from policy 9000B And then a number of them are just the changes we make because we capitalize all of the board, superintendent, and whatnot. So starting with just policy 1540, or is there any questions or comments or feedback on that?
TJ?
The last time this was before us, I'll repeat what I said then, which is that I don't see a whole lot of point in a policy that is all about should. I think that, we have an obligation to follow the laws, but beyond that, giving advice to board members doesn't seem, in future and each other, it doesn't seem to me to be our role. And this is all premised on board members should. I kind of looked around other policies, and I found one I really like, which is Pecatonica, which says that uphold the Constitution and follow the law. That's their board members' ethics policy. And I don't really see anything wrong with looking at that. More specifically, my understanding from having read a few opinions is that when we come down to now renumbered 16, I believe, I don't think an elected official can be banned from a meeting and in Wisconsin. And this calls for someone to remove themselves. I have seen other policies where there's a procedure where someone can be asked to remove themselves, and if they don't remove themselves, then that is noted in the minutes, and et cetera, et cetera. But a blanket policy, I don't think it's actually statutory.
Doable.
Yeah, and secondly,
like that.
I've made a habit of removing myself from the table when there's a conflict there. That's a personal choice. I don't think, and I think that there are times when, I think that this contemplates someone removing themselves from the stage. Where I think that when we're on the stage, I think that, simply pushing yourself away from the table, if you so choose, is a lot less disruptive. And so I think that around, number one is, I think, again, the whole should is something that I won't support. But if this goes forward, I would like to see that section cleaned up.
Okay.
I have a comment, Ed.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so my comments would be in regard to Section 8 and 15 of 1540 around the social media.
Yep.
I just feel like that's good information. I feel like that's helpful, particularly for people that are onboarding, to understand the implications of open meetings law and that type of stuff and what might constitute that. But I don't see how that needs to be written into board policy. I'm slightly concerned around, or more concerned around, the number 8, I believe, because it calls out specifically social media, but it doesn't discuss other formats where board members may be engaging with the media, whether that's during TV interviews, radio interviews, newspaper articles. I just think that I think we all need to be mindful when we're using any kind of social platform, whether that's through the newspaper or Facebook or Wart. But I don't see how that can be written into a policy. I think, in most cases that I've seen, whether it's a blog from Ed or TJ, it's very clear that it represents their perspective. And I would say the same as if you post something on your Facebook page and it has your name on it, then you're not saying this represents the Board of Education. It's clearly an individual perspective. So I don't see how you can put this into a policy and whether we could really enforce it as the Board of Education.
So, Anna, you would prefer that it not be included at all, as opposed to adding something about having it apply to speaking to the media or expanding it in the way you talked about initially?
Well, I think you could make it broader like that, but then what do you do when you go to, a luncheon and somebody asks to get your perspective on some issue that's coming before the Board of Education? Someone could perceive that, even though you're speaking as a board member, someone may take your public comments and they could misconstrue those as being the position of the Board of Education. So I just feel like it's one of these things that it's good to have guidance, in that when people are on the board, they're aware of, the position of power that they hold, but I don't see how you can actually write it into a policy.
Anyone else? Mary?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. I would agree with TJ that that being away from the table, clearly not part of the discussion, is acceptable. It's unclear to me why we have being out of the room for work groups is different than a board meeting. Why one would require being out of the room, but the other one would not require being out of the room. Is there a reason for that?
Due both to the proximity and just the kind of clamoring up and down the stage, and but no, I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts on that, but really because the work groups are in this smaller confined space was really what it had to do, and closed sessions also occur in this room.
Okay. I would see making those consistent. I also agree with Anna with regards to calling out social media specifically on the on point 8. It starts with saying about communicating, but then only calls out social media. I would make those consistent and actually include the communications as not call out social media specifically, but say that that last part, board members should be mindful in communicating whatever, so it says the same thing as the beginning, can be misconstrued by the public as a statement by the entire board. With regards to whether these are included or not included, whether it's a should or a matter of law, I am all in favor of having these. I think that our ability to serve as an effective board is very much determined by not only how we get together, but how we are perceived as leaders of the school district in our community. And I think these are very basic policies that just ensure that that we avoid conflict of interest, that we have the highest levels of integrity. Are they required by law? No, not all of them. But I think for us to be viewed in our community and by our constituents as doing effective jobs as a board, it's how we interact. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about being on this board is how productive our interactions and conversations are. I think they're incredibly respectful. And I think that's a lot of that is due to that we adhere to certain codes of conduct. And so I'm all in favor of passing these. Dylan, I think you've done a good job at consolidating these into more usable form, and I thank you for that.
James?
Yeah, about the removal. I still support removal when we're in small groups. I think it's better served. It sends a clearer picture of trying to make sure that there's no obvious conflict of interest. When we're in this room, for example, and it's just the board, 7 of us, I think removal is appropriate at that time. I do think, though, that removal in the larger room, that's sort of problematic when we're on stage there. And I would propose that we remove this sentence, shall physically remove him or herself from the table and stage during the meeting in which the issue has been discussed. I would remove that sentence, but I do support removal from the room when we are just in closed session or in these smaller groups, because I think any appearance of conflict of interest is not a good thing for the board, and we should do everything we can to make sure that we don't have that appearance. And I know in larger organizations that has conflict of interest statements, the removal is huge. That people always remove themselves and make sure that there's absolute no appearance of conflict of interest. So those are the areas I would, for the main stage, I support, push it back from the table, whatever. But when we're in smaller groups, closed session, for example, I do think that removal is appropriate. Item 7 at the bottom of the page, first page. Act on behalf of the board, when we're talking about in quorum and all, I think that you have to exclude the board president on that one. I think just by president, you are in fact, in many cases, acting, that's why you're elected by the board. And so, so you almost always have to have a quorum, at least in my interpretation. And so I think that, unless I'm reading that wrong, I think that act on behalf of the board only in quorum with other board members, I think that excludes the president. But others can weigh in on that.
Yeah, going back to the basic question of whether we should have a policy, I agree that I think it makes sense to have something that kind of sets forth what our ground rules are, what our shared expectations of behavior for board members are, because it's helpful for all of us to have that. I understand that it doesn't really fit well as a policy, but I don't know where else we put it, but we've always had, there has always, at least as far back as I know, has been a policy that addresses these issues, and it's revisited every few years to make sure it reflects what people's common understanding was. And in fact, I worked on a revision of this, 6 or 7 years ago, where we came up with some of these. Now, the good news is that usually when we're revising this, we add new things that are reacting to the problems that we perceive and how the board's operating. And we don't have big problems now, so we're not trying to add, I want to get this one in there because I don't like what that's happening, how that's happening. So that's a good thing. On the social media, I think the point about social media that I think is worth noting is the risk about inadvertent violations of the open meetings law, because that really is a problem, because you can't really weigh in on these conversations on Facebook if there's more than a few of us. So I would keep that in. I don't think we need the rest of it, because I think the rest of it is covered by the other hortatory statements that are in here about how we are to behave. But I think that point makes sense. TJ?
I want to try and tease out, and I'm not really sure, responding to James on the president speaking on behalf of the board. And it's a quandary, because that is, in some sense, part of the role. I know that on multiple occasions we've directed the president and say that this is kind of where things are at, and that we nobody else is going to talk, and this is kind of these are agreed upon talking points, or agreed upon kind of things like that, and that's covered what says otherwise directed. But there is a more casual or less formal role where the board president has to kind of thread the needle between speaking for oneself and speaking to interpret the actions of the board in some kind of official capacity. I think that the presidents that I've served with have all been able to thread that needle by saying this is what we did, and separate out and not say we did this because speaking for all the board, because I think that that 7 board members do things for 7 different reasons, and maybe we do need some kind of exception there, but I think we need to phrase it very carefully to make sure that the board president also continues to distinguish between describing what the board did and describing the motives of the board in ways that perhaps the action, if we pass a resolution that says we're doing this because A, B, and C, that's easy. But it's when we vote in favor of something that, again, we have, I might have 3 reasons for voting in favor of something, and James might only be aware of one of them. And so I think that I don't know how to craft that, Dylan, but I do, again, I think the board presidents have done a good job threading that needle.
Yeah, and if I can respond to that.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. And that's exactly what happens. Board presidents will always have to decide whether or not, and make it clear whether or not they're speaking on behalf of the board. So if you want to craft language around that, that's certainly fine with me. But that's, to me, the president's job. And when I sit here and elect the next president, I'm going to be voting for someone that I think can do it in that manner, that will be able to exercise those options, making sure that when it's time to speak for themselves, they do that, and when it's time to speak for the board, they're capable of doing that. Now, whether or not you can capture that in language, you go ahead and try it, that's fine. But I think that's just a quality of a board president. And so whoever I vote for board president, that's going to be one of the qualities that I'm looking for. So,
Dean?
Yeah, I don't have anything specific to add here. It's just that these types of things, I was really resonated what you said about, hey, I don't like this, so I'm gonna add something in here, and it seems like we've almost doubled the length of this to try to capture some of that. And to me, it's that old, let's just try to keep this as simple as possible. And there are some things that I think people bring to the board that are understood, and that a respectful conversation towards each other in and outside of meetings should be brought and understood, and if you can write a general statement about that. But it's just, I don't know, these types of things, I like to try to keep them as simple as possible. That's my only comment.
This isn't, there's just a little bit that's added to this from the existing policy. Very little of this is
Well, all
new.
the blue is kind of...
Pardon?
All the blue is all addition.
Well, but remember, some of it migrated over from 9000B, so we
Right.
simplified by converging two policies.
All right, yeah, you're right. I
So-
forgot that, but it's just, it's still my point of just trying to keep it simple.
Yeah, but, yeah, that was the goal, whether I overcomplicated one at the expense of another, certainly,
Like,
I'm open to that
was
feedback.
almost suggesting, look, avoid a laundry list of things you're not supposed to do. And it's like, I don't need all that. I know what I'm not supposed to do. I want to come here and be respectful. And if there's something on the conflict, I'm going to move away. And so it's like that hard for a lot of us to accept all this stuff. And you throw more and more words into it. Okay, but, I don't need a laundry list of things I'm not supposed to do.
Understood.
I'm a big boy. I can handle that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Anyone else? All right.
So then, policy 9000 was currently 9008, but we would consolidate and it would just be 9000. And really, ow. The focus on this one is looking at the conflict of interest section and just having some discussions regarding what is a conflict of interest. Is there an ability for a board member to impose undue influence on any conversation if they are in a meeting that is of district staff? And it kind of piggybacks on that conversation we had earlier when we were talking about this policy of what are the hats individuals are wearing when they come into the meeting, and can you, as a member of an outside board or organization, or as an employee of an outside organization, remove your board member hat and only participate in those meetings as a member of that outside group. And so I added provision 5 on page 2 about taking a formal legal position or a formal position contrary to that of the board through an employment activity or volunteer role, and specifically addressing the issue that came up of, well, what if I'm acting as a parent and not a board member, and recognizing that may be a different situation. But it specifically says that no member of the Board of Education through employment activity or volunteer role or other means, shall take a formal position that is adverse to the district, including legal actions, formal complaints, and mediated outcomes. This limitation does not include individual actions commenced by a member on his or her own behalf. So if there is a complaint of discrimination or something like that, or on behalf of his or her child. And I added language regarding undue influence about using the no member of the Board of Education shall use his or her position as a board member to exert undue influence upon district staff in any decisional process. Board members shall acknowledge that their presence at any meeting where district staff are present is likely to create a perception of an imbalance of power and shall not use such positional authority to direct district staff to adopt the board member's position. There was also an addition on the last page, which talks about some honorarium for a student teacher. This one may actually end up being taken care of in the state budget, which would allow payment to student teachers. But right now, sometimes they get a gift card to say thank you. So those were the three big changes in that one. Are there any questions, comments, or feedback on 9,000?
I'm struggling with the undue influence because I just have such a hard time separating them in terms of, and you just can't. A board member that's a parent, you're always a board member regardless. It's a tough one to separate. No matter what meeting you go to, and you're not trying to wear your, let's say, I don't know if it's a parent-teacher conference, and you're not trying to wear your board member hat. It's just like once you put that hat on, you can't take it off. It's a permanent hat. So, I'm not objecting totally to this, but would like to talk about it a little bit and see what other people have to say about it. It's just, I find that you can't remove your board member hat. Dylan Pauly cannot remove her legal hat. Jen Cheatham cannot remove her superintendent hat. You can't do it. Yeah, no matter where you are, you can't do it. I don't know. It's a thin line to tiptoe around, and I think that you don't go out of your way to try to use it in a way to influence.
I think that's what this is saying, James. I read this as not saying you can't have influence, but you can't try to influence, right? And
I'm a board member, and
right?
you better be careful. I'm a board member, and right. And I don't know that anyone does that, but but it's a tough one. It's a real thin line, and I don't know how you remove your hat.
Mary?
I think there might be a typo in, no member of the Board of Education shall use his or position.
Yeah.
Their position.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gender.
James, I read that to say that shall not use his or her position as a board member to exert undue influence. Doesn't mean you're not going, you might feel you need to exert undue influence just as a person, but using your board position, I think, is such.
So what does that look like, I guess?
Well, I like the directions that says the board member shall acknowledge that their presence at a meeting where district staff are present is likely to create that perception and shall not use that positional authority to direct the staff. So, I mean, I run into this when I'm in meetings with district staff when we're talking about the AVITOPS program. And I'm there clearly with regards to the Boys and Girls Club. And so I specifically call out and say, no, I'm here wearing my Boys and Girls Club hat and not as a board member. Obviously,
So
that I
does that-
can't just
you
take
feel that
it
removes-
off.
that
But
removes
by
it?
me acknowledging and saying, you know what, I don't want to use my position to create that influence. I'm not saying it doesn't, but at least I'm able to communicate to acknowledge that staff may feel that, whether I intended it or not intended it, and try to have a relationship and a discussion that isn't bringing that into the room. So I agree with you. You can't just take it off and say that people aren't going to be impacted. But I do believe that that's why the paragraph is necessary. So we establish some recognition that, in fact, when we step into a room or step into a meeting with staff members, whether or not we intend to, it's coming, and that we are cognizant of it, and we will not try to exert undue influence.
I think it foreshadows for staff, because sometimes a question comes up, can they be there? And so I think it foreshadows that they can be there. And I think kind of my thought was that, let's say we're at a meeting that's looking for consensus, whatever consensus is, and there's a board member present. A board member shouldn't say, well, I am a board member, so we're going to weight my vote by 2, right? Like that would be a kind of perverse example of using it. But at that point, you are using your board membership to weight that conversation in a way that's inappropriate. Because I think sometimes staff are surprised that board members wear other hats or play other roles in the community. And so often they think, oh, they're not allowed to be there. And so I think this actually also helps staff understand the multifaceted role that an individual who is also a board member may play in a big but still small community like Madison.
Yep. Yeah, I think I have a different take on it. I was trying to think about what is the issue that we're trying to get at here.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I thought about that, what I came up with was no board member shall advocate on behalf of any unrelated student or groups of students with school-based staff. And I would probably expand that to say can't represent an organization with school-based staff. Like, Mary, I don't think you should be there on behalf of Boys and Girls Club when they're talking about Avitops. I think that just kind of inherently weighs the scales.
I would say I'm a better board member. The only reason I'm even a board member was because of my active involvement with Avitops, and I think a lot of us who are involved with the schools bring a good or an added value of perspective from those programs. And there's never, for the most part, I can't even think of an instance, at least within the last couple of years, where we're ever discussing anything that's like a negotiation or anything like that. So this is really, these are program about the program and how we make it better and what the issues are. And so, no, I would completely disagree with you, Ed. I think it makes me a better board member, and we're not discussing adverse situations.
Well, it's somehow not clear when that line is approached. So you have that on the one.
Partners. This is a partnership.
No, I understand, but you have, okay, so on one end of the spectrum, there's that. On the other end of the spectrum, I'm not going to represent a student in an expulsion. I think that would be totally out of line.
Well, that would fall into the formal position that is adverse to the district, and
I could say, it's not adverse, we're trying to work something out, but I couldn't do that. But where do you draw the line?
Well, I think one thing is that in that partnership too, it's very clear the Boys and Girls Club doesn't get any money there from the school district. In fact, it's the opposite way. Money is paid from the Boys and Girls Club to the school district. And so, in fact, I think if it was the other way around, would I think, I might have, I'd have some concerns about that. But in this case, it goes the other way.
Yeah. TJ?
I want to engage around these issues and related ones, but first I want to clarify something around at the bottom in the definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And the sentence that comes right before the definitions, which is sanctions. It appears to say that an employee is defined as, the first definition is defined as citizen members except for students on the school board committees, and that an employee there includes school board members. And then above it says sanctions, employees violating this policy or procedure are subject to discipline up to and including dismissal. I don't believe that the district has the power to dismiss school board members.
Where are you at? Where are you?
I'm on page 3.
Dang.
It has to, a citizen can take it to the circuit court, and there's a whole kind of way things happen, but, so I think that we need to clarify around that.
Yeah.
And
Fair.
and I'm not even sure that actually that the district can sanction a school board member. They might be able to censure, but I don't think they can sanction.
And that's really the board can censure.
Can
Its
censure,
own.
but not sanction, which is a different, I mean, there's.
Yep. Quite frankly, TJ, I didn't even look at that section that closely.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll be honest.
It just jumped out at me.
Before you go,
yeah.
leave that, in the definitions, employee is defined at, I think there's a typo in there.
Another typo.
I think the parenthesis was supposed to be around just accept students, isn't it?
Yep. Yep, except students. So
Except
is
students.
defined as citizen
Right,
members
right.
of school board committees except students.
Okay. On the, I have to get the right page here. We seem to. I think the undue influence, actually, that you did a very good job with that section. And I think that, the key words I see there is the word undue, and then, and not use such positional authority to direct district staff to adopt a board member's position. I think that that's, I mean, maybe it could be tweaked a little bit, but I don't have any problems with that. The section above, number 5, is something that I've got problems with from 15 different directions.
Okay.
And I'll try and limit myself to 2 or 3. First off, I don't think it is our role, and I also don't think we have the power beyond what's spelled out in I think it's statutes 96.13 to limit board members' private activities, and that's very specific around contracting over $15,000. And essentially, you can't be an elected official and engage in contracting under these circumstances. And that's pretty much all the state statutes allow in terms of limiting outside work by elected officials. And so I'd like to see a legal case for making other limitations. Secondly, I don't think it's appropriate. And I don't know how we can define some of these. I agree with that. I don't think it is appropriate for a board member to represent a client who is suing the district. I agree with that, but I'm not sure that we can do anything about that. And I think that any way we define this becomes overly broad. And what is a formal and informal action? I'm going to give an example. I'm a board member of Wisconsin Alliance for Excellent Schools, and currently, the governor's budget, in addition to the 12% requirement, takes $200 and puts it in a per pupil categorical aid. I have been and will push for, and perhaps through ways and perhaps informal ways, including formal communications with elected officials, that should be put into the equalization formula and be done with a revenue cap increase. This is adverse to MMSD. MMSD would lose probably $5 or $6 million in state funding if that approach was taken. Yet I think it's much, much better public policy. And I don't think that my service as a Board of Education member should preclude me from advocating for what I think are good public policies. And I don't, I don't see, and that's a real problem, because it definitely, ed policy is a place where there are disagreements. And these disagreements, I can also talk about in teaching. That in teaching, if I'm teaching both in history and in education, I will praise and criticize policies and practices of our district. And I will do that because that's what I think my students should hear. And certainly that is, in some sense could be construed as adverse to the interests of the district. Yet, I think this is better than the draft before, but I don't think that we can get a draft that doesn't step in places it shouldn't.
TJ, I agree with you on the policy stuff. I don't think that and I didn't read this as prohibiting board members from taking any position about educational or any other policy
Matter of public concern.
that they feel is appropriate. I viewed it as being directed towards, I don't know, direct interactions with the school district on behalf of a student or group of students or an organization where there's, where there's actually a potential adverse relationship.
What does it, I guess, shall take a formal position. What is a formal position?
Well,
if I testify
right.
before a state committee, I think that's,
No, I'm not
I
saying.
mean, that to me feels like a formal position.
I understand what you're saying, and I think it should be modified to make it clear that that's not what's intended.
Yeah, because I mean, the legal action formal complaint mediated outcomes was intended to be what is demonstrative of taking a position that is formal, right? So.
But do you mean something that's student-specific or school-specific?
Let me know when I can chime in, Ed.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Anna, anytime. Although Dylan's pondering
Okay.
right now, she may be,
I guess I don't understand the question totally by school-specific or student-specific.
it seems to me that that's the context in which these issues arise, when there is an issue regarding how a school or the school district is dealing with a student or a group of
A
students.
particular incident versus a larger matter of public concern, such as ed policy or.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I'm not articulating it well. I have a vague sense of what I understand to be the distinction, but I can't describe it. Anna, I'm sorry.
That was clear to me, but yeah, go to Anna.
Anna, you have thoughts?
Sure. So one thought I have under undue influence, my question would just be, can you give an example of a situation where this would apply? And then what, as the district, you would like to see happen if a board member was involved in that situation?
Would you like me to give the?
I'm sorry, am I muted?
No, everyone's thinking. And nobody knows who's supposed to answer.
Can you give an example? Or do you have an idea on what an example would be, Anna?
Come up with one. I could make one up. I mean, tell me. If
Hey, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just trying to get a handle on what situation you see this bullet addressing, Dylan.
She's pondering.
I there are all kinds of decisions that educators make in any given day. So it's about any undue influence on any of those decisions. But the things that are popping into my head right now are things like directing, some district manager to hire someone that you have a preference for. I don't know, what else can you think of, Dylan? I mean, right, yeah, Mary, do you have a good example?
A few years back, I volunteered over at Alice as a tutor, and I could see that I might go into the principal's office and say, this is what was happening in the classroom, and I think this is a real problem, and you should take action about this. That, I think, is
I think
exactly
that's a
the
really
type
good
of thing.
example.
And because I am a board member, she might actually feel pressure
do that,
to
yeah.
do it. I might be going in just as a tutor thinking, I think there's a problem. But because I'm a board member, she will weight that differently and feel that undue pressure. I think something like this is exactly why we need that to be respectful and also aware of our. And I agree with TJ. I mean, we have to make sure that we word this that it's not about other issues outside of our interactions.
So then I'm just trying to think through then with this clause then, you in that situation at Alice, how would this clause have directed your behavior as a community member as well as a board member? Would you have said, I'm on the Board of Education and I'm not acting as a board member, but I just want you to let you know that I think what's going on is totally inappropriate?
Well, first of all, I would think twice about whether it's really my position at all. I'm there as a tutor, not as a formal educator. If I felt that there was something seriously going on, I would report it to the superintendent and say, this is something I saw going on that I think you should be aware of. And I would use my position as a board member and my relationship with the superintendent to do that.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand, because for someone who is sometimes in a situation where I might be in meetings with other staff members, I think disclosure is good. I just think the unintended consequences when you announce your position in a room as a Board of Education member, sometimes people will act differently towards you as if they didn't know that you were on the Board of Education. And so I'm just trying to think how this would look if we actually put it into practice. If, every time we go into a school that we announce that we're on the Board of Education, is that going to be fulfilling this part of undue influence?
If I hear you correctly, Anna, you're saying that the requirement in this policy to acknowledge that their presence at any meeting where the district staff are present, that in fact might create the very situation we're trying to avoid, which is that the undue influence is exerted simply by stating that, and whether in formal and informal ways. What I do like here is that shall not use their positional authority to direct district staff to adopt a school board member's position. I think that that's key, and I think that that's something we all agree to.
I completely agree with that point of it. I'm just trying to say the unintended consequences of when you announce your position anytime you're in a school building, it might be creating the power differential that we're trying to minimize.
Not even in a school building.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Dylan, is that what you meant by the word acknowledge? I never read it that way. I thought it was just more personal
I read it as like
acknowledgement,
own it,
but not
like-
announcement.
Right.
Awareness.
Yeah, be
I
aware
think this
that-
word we're getting
Have a
stuck on-
personal awareness that
Right. That's
that
what you
you-
meant.
that your role can be perceived as one, and so just be aware of the
Yeah.
perception.
You didn't mean acknowledge as
Yeah.
meaning announcement.
I did
Yeah.
not.
That's how I read it, was announced.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so let's, yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't want to create a thou doth protest too much. Like, don't do it because I am a board member and I'm going to say the word board member 6 times just to remind you that I don't want you to know I'm a board member.
But you're raising a good point. I think the emphasis should be on the school district employee, and you don't want to put them in a position where they feel constrained from exercising their best judgment about what should happen in a particular situation for fear of irritating or coming to a conclusion adverse to a school board member who's sitting across from the table from them. I think there's an inherent imbalance of power there that we want to protect the school district employees from.
Yeah, I think that is the essence of it. And then how do you find the right mix between saying, so you can never participate, but how do you understand that inherent imbalance and mitigate it to the extent possible? And how can we use this language so staff are aware that they can be comfortable acting as professionals and having a professional voice even with a board member in the room?
So do you think this is a board member thing, or do you think this is a staff policy?
I think it's a board member thing.
Okay.
Help staff members
That
understand
helps
the
staff members
expectation.
understand the roles, expectations, and yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think the issue that also comes into it is that there is always going to be a power differential, and I think James alluded to that at any time, and that might even go on to whether we're looking at the power differential between staff and parents. the power differential between parents and kids or staff and kids and all of that type of stuff. So I'm just trying to struggle. I'm struggling with whether we can create a policy that dictates common sense and good judgment.
Yeah, and I think, Anna, I mean, your point is a good one. There's nothing about this policy statement that will change the imbalance of power. There is an imbalance of power, period. It just exists. But what this statement says is that the board member won't use that imbalance of power, use their positional authority to direct staff. And I think that's the difference. So, yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing is that there's consensus that no member of the Board of Education would ever use their position to leverage undue influence in a situation.
Yeah.
I guess it gets a little bit murkier about the second statement on how that plays out when you're in schools or in the community.
But the previous section as well kind of precludes board members in certain circumstances from even being in a position where they could exercise undue authority, right?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that one.
Yeah.
Number 5. I struck by what TJ was saying, that many of us in our employment and advocacy roles might run into problem with everything in between the commas. So in one way, no member of the Board of Education and everything in between the commas, I think, ought to be struck. And then just no member of the Board of Education shall take a formal position that is adverse to the district that includes legal actions, formal complaints, and mediated outcomes, because those are all legal actions. Those are things that are none of our that are going on. We should not weigh in on legal actions or formal complaints and mediated outcomes. We have those happen every year, and we don't get involved in legal actions and suits or things. But other things, as TJ was saying, if he's teaching a class and trying to make a point, that everything in the between the commas kind of captures us from even watching what we say when we're arguing with somebody. But the other things, those are legal and formal issues and mediated stuff. We shouldn't, clearly, and I think it's understood, that we don't comment on those things. We're not supposed to. We hear a lot of these things in closed sessions, and we know what that means. But the other stuff, TJ shouldn't be prohibited from being on this board and going to advocate to the state for educational policy changes and state ordinance change. I don't want that. And me too. I'm going to be there Wednesday talking about housing policies that are going to impact school policies. But so anyway, see what I mean? Those things. Yeah. Everything between the commas. Maybe we should just. That's intrusive to our own personal lives in a lot of ways. The other stuff is clearly board stuff, and that's I agree with 100%.
So do you have enough to make this clearer? I mean, because we
Yeah,
can
I'll work
go
on
on
it.
with this one. I do appreciate the sentence on limitation because that's a real struggle for any board member that's a parent. How do you advocate?
Well, it's a struggle for me too, I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
we
I
can't
appreciate
stop being
that
parents.
sentence. Yeah, I appreciate that sentence.
So the other policy we had for consideration tonight is the new magnet school policy. And so it's kind of brought as a precursor to our discussions about Wright in April. But when we talked about Wright not moving forward as a charter school, but moving forward as a magnet school, we kind of realized we don't have a magnet policy, and that it would be nice to have one. And so I did provide for you a draft magnet policy. Then I'd recommend 2 actions at the regular meeting, which is approving the magnet school policy, of course, following any feedback or input or questions you have on that tonight, and at the regular board meeting. And then formally recognizing Spring Harbor Middle School as falling within that policy, and then we will take up Wright then at the April board meeting. Are there any questions, comments, or feedback on the draft magnet school policy, magnet school and program policy.
Yeah, I concur with the speaker tonight. It's actually an observation I made that the number 4, I think it's number 4, let's see. Yes, it states it in 3, the proposal to the development of the magnet school program may be initiated by the superintendent or his or her designee and the board, but there's no process for the board here, so it's just for the superintendent. So,
Yeah, quite frankly, I just wasn't like, so the board can agendize and make recommendations and discuss what they wanted to discuss. It was hard for me to contemplate, and I can add how that could be vetted or given input from the administrative team, but it didn't make sense for the board to have to fill out an application. It would be very difficult, even with open meetings laws and those kind of things, for there to be that formal written proposal.
and I'm not saying what it should look like, I'm just saying we
Okay.
have stated in 3 that the board has a process. It's stated there, so the question is, what's the process? Process may be, Jen, could we have a magnet school? I'm not saying what the process is, I'm just saying there isn't one, so.
Guess I'll go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
It's, I think 1 and 2 are fine. I think that if we need to define magnet schools, these are fine definitions. I'm not sure, does Spring Harbor have an advisory council?
They do not, I don't believe.
So then we would be designating them an advisory of magnet school, even though they're in violation of the magnet school policy. I mean, just from a technical point of view, that's kind of weird to be recommending. I think that when we go beyond 1 and 2, I think that this needs further board and community and board discussion and fleshing out both who's the role, who can propose a magnet school. I think that if if the board can do it, there needs to be a process around that. I think that perhaps maybe staff should be able to do it other than the superintendent and his or her designee. I think that there should be some explicit criteria other than that it's open without discriminatory practices, which is about the only criteria here. I think there should be statements of purposes. I think that there should be a vetting process, perhaps a rubric and an analysis requirements, all of which is not here. And if we're going to do this, and if we are going to be initiating magnet schools, which is something we haven't done in decades, I think that we should be very, very careful how we go about it. If the problem is that Spring Harbor and Wright need a status, then 1 and 2 cover that. And the rest is something that I think that over the next months we can, and particularly in conjunction with the charter policy, that we can look at as options. But this is well beyond anything that fixes the problem with Wright's and Spring Harbor. Yeah.
Jen?
I actually agree with TJ on this. I mean, I know, I mean, we talked about this. Dylan and I have had this discussion.
It's late.
Meaning, we rarely agree. It was a little funny, wasn't it? I didn't mean it to be funny. But I really
It's late. It's all right. We all need to laugh.
A little bit, yeah. But in all seriousness, I think the reason we even put this policy together was to just be able to name what a magnet school is. If it at all seems premature to develop a process, I mean, I'm certainly not tied to what's written here. I think, we were thinking that it might be nice to have something. But I would be comfortable personally with just having the definition stand for now. It's not as if we have a bunch of new magnet programs or schools waiting in the wings. That's not the reality. So if in the short term, I think it might be fine just to do the definitions and leave it there. Yeah.
And let me just add one thing, is that perhaps the exclusion of the dual language should go in number 2.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, TJ, if that came off.
No, it's
and
no,
I really do apologize.
Like I
for
said,
that.
we all needed it.
Okay.
You might want to say magnet school may have an advisory council instead of must have, just to.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay,
All right.
thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Dylan.
It was nice to have a lot of time to talk about it tonight, so thank you.
Next. All right, here we go again. Update on safe drinking water and lead testing plan. We have the guys in ties back.
Here we are.
That's right. We requested this opportunity to add this item to the agenda tonight, just to bring you a brief update on our program for testing for lead levels in the school water supply, and mostly just to give you sort of what we're up to and give you a chance to ask any questions or make any comments, just as a communication exercise. So it's an important issue for our staff and students and community. We wanted to make sure that we were very upfront about what we're doing and how we're doing it.
So you may recall, I believe it was the January regular board meeting, wedged between many public speakers for Montessori schools. We had the president of the Madison Water Utility Board come and make a comment encouraging us to do some testing in our schools. Her big idea was Madison has been on the forefront in terms of their work to make sure that the drinking water is the best it can be, and asked us to consider doing our part. I can tell you that we took that seriously, almost immediately met with Madison Water Utility Board and Dane County Health and just did some digging. In Wisconsin in particular, testing for lead in schools is actually a rarity. It's not required by the EPA, and we didn't have a ton of background into doing this work. So we did meet with those folks and decided to, I guess, pardon the pun, kind of dip our toe into the water and see what we were getting ourselves into, and utilized our own in-house district trade staff to test 157 drinking fountains in the east attendance area, and got those test results back, informed and principals and community members that 14 drinking fountains came back too high for lead, 15 parts per billion or higher, and decided at that point, kind of working with Mike and some additional resources, that maybe we needed to do even some more testing in the east attendance area and test our entire district, just because it was the right thing to do. We've got a plan to do that. We've decided, after we've met with a third-party consultant and taken some more advice from a number of folks, we've decided the scope of work that we could take on right now would be testing everything in the district that you would likely be used as a source of drinking water. My team's been kind of working feverishly at this for the last couple of weeks, and we came up with a number of 1,350 fixtures district-wide that we feel should be tested in round one. We have over 3,000 fixtures district-wide that are water fixtures, but 1,350 that would either be classroom drinking fountains, public drinking fountains. We're taking on ice makers and sinks in staff lounges, sinks in kitchens, the common sense things that you would want to make sure are as safe as could be. And we hope to get that work done over the next few weeks, just because we're starting to get many questions that we got into some schools. When am I up? I want to know the same, and I don't blame anyone on the other end of that for asking those questions. So we're gonna try to get that done over the next few weeks, with the goal actually of having test results back to the community and any repair or replacement that has to happen to fixtures done hopefully even over spring break, so that we can assure everyone that anything that is a drinking fixture in our district that is on has been tested and it's below EPA limits for drinking water. I've been working with Rachel and our communication team on a website, kind of walking you through the story I just told you, and then an FAQ that could be anything from the testing protocol to we're working with Sally Zerbel-Donish on some health-related questions that folks might have as well. So that's in a nutshell, I think what we were hoping to update you on, I know we're at the 11th hour here of this meeting. I think we'll turn it over for questions unless I missed anything.
James?
Yeah, and I'm no expert on lead. A question and a couple of questions. Now, isn't Madison or Dane County one of the few cities or counties in the country that have actually replaced all the lead pipes in the city?
I think Madison's one of only 2 cities, I think Madison Water Utility said.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if that's the case, I guess I've always thought that lead in drinking water came from those aging pipe systems. So if Madison have done that, so is the lead then some localized source in the drinking fountain? I mean, what's the source? What will be the source of the lead?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm learning a lot about this as I go as well. 13 of the 14 water fountains that we found so far were the old porcelain water fountains that were original to the building. And we're actually finding that a lot of them, I don't want to make a direct cause and effect here, but a lot of those drinking fountains might be in the same proximity as an electric cooled water fountain so the porcelain one might sit and not get any use for weeks on end when all of us know the best drinking fountains even in our own area that we work in. So if water sits in a drinking fountain and there's brass-based components in that drinking fountain, almost all brass, even to this day, is made with some lead in it. And depending on the alkalinity of the water that's in contact with that brass, some lead can leach out. So we're actually learning a ton of this as well as we go. So even things that are being put into buildings, new construction still to this day, have some amount of lead actually still in the fixture itself. So we're updating the fixtures to have the lowest possible lead content that we can find, but that's the biggest factor what we're finding right now.
TJ?
First of all, I want to thank you for the work and also the transparency around it. I think it's great. And I also want to, in this context, I want to use the word bubbler once, so I just did. It being Wisconsin, I think that we should use the word bubbler in this conversation. And number 3 is, I didn't hear from you, and I know this is the case, but a clear statement, I think a community wants to hear it, is that when we find the elevated lead levels from a source, we are taking that out of commission immediately.
On the spot, yep.
And that's something that I think that our community needs to hear as clearly as they can. So,
Yep. Yeah. I've had more press inquiries than I ever expected to have around this, and that's certainly been a talking point every time I talk to the press. We're working with principals on letters that will go home if we happen to have one that comes back high, and that is the header on it. The first time we found it was high, it's off until we know it's right.
And will there be something that explains that if your kid happened to take a drink from one that is now shut down, they're not necessarily in danger?
Yeah.
A really quick and convenient source is an interview that was done by Channel 3. Dr. Beth Neary, a local pediatrician, was interviewed and did a terrific job of explaining the health aspects of this issue. And neither of us are physicians, so we would refer you there. And of course, on our own website, which goes up
hopefully tomorrow,
we will have additional resources that explain.
Will you have a link to that
Yes.
particular interview?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Anna? Michael?
James?
All right, thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thank you.
I move to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
So